You want to beat the Rossolimo? Then try my recommendation from my Chessable course, the Anti-Sicilians for Black, 3 Knight F6. That's what one of my viewers did, and he proudly sent in his game for me to have a look at, and that's what I want to show you now. By the way, my Chessable courses, the Anti-Sicilians for Black and the Sicilian Kalashnikov, are both on sale over Easter. You'd be mad to miss out. I'll put the links down below. Okay, so why 3 Knight F6? Well, you can see there's a basic problem for Black in this position. Lack of development on the king side. Look at these pieces. They're all on their starting blocks and no pawn moves made either. So Knight F6 addresses that issue. You've got to start developing the king side, otherwise it's very dangerous. But there's another thing that White is trying to do, apart from, overrun Black with speedy development. White often wants to play c3 and d4 to establish a big centre. So Knight F6 attacks this pawn, and in defending that pawn or moving it, then it's more difficult for White to build this big centre. So I think it's important that we provoke White and put some pressure on White from the beginning. So there are 3 main moves here. There's e5, there's knight c3, and there's bishop takes c6. So that's the move that was played in this game. And I recommend d takes c6 in this position because it allows this bishop to come into the game. Usually to g4, but, well, not always. Anyway, depends how White plays. So d3 is the most popular move here, but e5 was played in this game. Or I should say, this game was sent in to me by Giovanni Cipollaro, and the game was played in the Italian Team Championship. Right, let's crack on. So e5 hits the knight. Actually, that's what we want, because this square is available for the knight. This square can often be used for Black. And yeah, this pawn, it's not threatening actually. It's the squares either side of it that are available for Black now. Now, White plays a3. Well, yes indeed, there is a special place in hell for players that make these little pawn moves at the side of the board. You've got to know when to play them, and this is not a great moment. Apparently, after the game, player of the white pieces said that he wanted to push this knight away with c4, but didn't want this knight to come into b4. Well, fair enough. I would say the whole strategy with c4 is somewhat questionable, but anyway. And here, Giovanni plays g6, very sound. That's generally the way we want to go in this particular variation. Just develop quickly. There's a very interesting alternative which I've highlighted before on the channel, and that's h6. Yes, I know there's a special place in hell, but in this case you could be really ambitious and play g5 and bishop g7 and maybe bishop f5, and it's about setting up some initiative on the king side as well as potentially surrounding that e-pawn. So yes, you've got to know when and how to play these little pawn moves at the side of the board. But g6, absolutely sound, very sensible. d3, bishop g7, castles, and bishop g4. So as Giovanni says, this was the start of his plan to surround this e-pawn. He's putting pressure on that pawn straight away. Rook e1 defends the pawn. And now Giovanni was very proud of this move, queen b8. He thought about playing queen c7, but then he thought that this knight would be somehow misplaced on b6. In fact, I think this is also good for Black. But queen b8 is clever because it means that after c4, so there's pressure here, but after c4, he wanted to drop his knight back to c7. And this is indeed a very typical maneuver in this whole variation, planting the knight on e6, and regardless of whether this pawn is on c4 or c2, very often this knight wants to land on this beautiful square d4. I mean, here it basically just prevents white from pushing with d4, but it blockades this e-pawn, looks at some key squares in the position. Great square for the knight. Hits the bishop, so the bishop came back to g3 and castles. There we go. So the king is safe and sound on the king side. That's a result. You know, it's hard for white to build up an attack when you're set up like this. Knight d2. And here, if we look at the structure, then black has a clear target, that pawn d3. And yes, this fits in with the lecture I gave to my patrons the other day about unnecessary pawn moves. Really, c4, okay, it pushed the knight, but unfortunately it has created a chronic weakness, and rook d8 starts to target that weakness. h3, whoops, I beg your pardon, h3, hits the bishop, so bishop f5, attacks here, and knight e4. Well, the knight's not bad on e4. It's a very interesting moment in the game, actually. Start of the middle game, really. Have a quick think. How would you play as black here? I mean, I think there are several very attractive continuations. What would you do? You have a think. I'll have a drink. Cheers. Well, Giovanni simply plays queen c7. Why not? He wants to maybe bring the queen out here, but also prepares perhaps doubling on the d file. So a very simple move, and I think a good move. Lots of interesting ideas here. I mean, one possibility is rook d7. And maybe shuffling the queen across to d8. Not bad. One very simple idea is to take on e4, because that knight could be troublesome. And again, play rook d7. So, you know, black's pieces are superb here. And just double on the d file. Most dynamic is to play b5. Well done if you went for that. So obviously threatening to take here. And if b3, well then undermine this pawn with a5 and a4. I mean, this really makes sense of these pieces. So white blocks, black exchanges. Okay, let's exchange off that knight, which is a strong piece. Also leaves the rook, I don't think very well placed on e4. Queen c7. And here the idea is simply rook b8, put the rook on b4, and then black is invading on the b file. I mean, this is very simple position for black to play. This is a chronic weakness. This is also weak. It's a beautiful position for black. Look how white's pieces are just locked out at play. That knight, what a piece on e6. Blockading the e-pawn, shutting those pieces out of play, controlling d4. Great position for black. So I think that's the most active move. But queen c7, softly, softly, it's good as well. If knight f6 check, this is often a tactic in this opening. In fact, the king can just step to the side and there's no harm done. Anyway, white played, after queen c7, b4. And again, I think exchanging off and queen d7, hitting that pawn, and b5, I think gives black a great initiative. But Giovanni decided to play in a different way with queen b6, hitting this pawn, and then he's ready to play rook d7, rook d8. Again, you know, white's pawns are really vulnerable here. And yeah, I think white has really quite a tough choice here. I mean, there are some funny tactics. If queen b3, then black can take and play knight c5, forking queen and rook. That's quite nice. Okay, it's possible to recapture with a pawn, but that looks pretty ugly somehow. You know, these pieces are dreadful. So white decided to just give up that b pawn. Bishop takes knight, rook takes. Yeah, that simplifies things. I think in this case it's a good idea to give up bishop for knight. And Giovanni simply captured the pawn on b4. I think everything's worked out fine. Rook b1. Queen a3. The queen is not in trouble. It's absolutely fine here. This pawn is attacked. Again, that chronically weak pawn. I think white should play d4 here. Is this menacing in some way? Is this impressive? Not really, because it's impossible to push forward with d5. And I think black is just very secure here. And I think, doubling on the d file is still on the cards. Black has a big advantage. But here, white messed up completely and played rook takes b7, allowing a knight fork. And that's basically game over. Rook c7 played. Here, the queen came back. I mean, it's still, apart from the fact that black is the exchange up, white's pieces are terrible. This pawn is threatened. Bishop f8, quite prosaic, but actually, why not? It's very difficult for white to do anything at all here. Exchange of pieces, rook b4. White goes for it with e6, but there's nothing doing. Just exchange. And then queen c1, very sensible indeed. Threatening mate and an exchange of queens. And white had to exchange going to this endgame, but this is obviously completely winning for black. With this pawn steaming down the board. And indeed, Giovanni won very easily after that. So congratulations to him. Well done, Giovanni. And thank you for sending in the game. And a quick reminder that my Chessable courses, the Anti-Sicilians for Black and Sicilian Kalashnikov, are on sale over Easter. You'd be mad to miss out.